welcome everyone. Welcome to our Media of the Month conversation around the TV series Messiah. I'm Trina Wyatt, founder and CEO of Conscious Good, proud supporter of the Creators Network and the show, and I'm so honored to co-host this monthly event with none other than Allan Kaplan of the Integral Cinema Project. And Mark, I will hand the mic over to you now.
Thank you, Trina.
I'm just going to say I'm going to mute everybody, so if you want to talk, just unmute yourselves.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Actually, I guess please mute yourselves. I don't know if I can mute you all.
Oh, I think I could do that. There we go.
Oh, you can do that.
Cool. All right. Well, welcome everybody. And so Messiah, but before we talk about Messiah, we want to do a little kind of short little perception practice I like to do, connected with the piece that we're exploring. And so this one is paradigm shifting. So if you can just get comfortable, relax. If you like to close your eyes, if that helps your inner visioning, or if you like to keep your eyes open, that's cool. Just kind of bring your awareness to your way of perceiving the world, like right now, listening to my voice and the words I'm saying. Just try to bring your awareness to how each word you are interpreting through this memories of past hearing that word, studying language. Feel that even the language, which is beautiful and right and important, that is a structure in our consciousness that we are operating through. It has boundaries. It limits us in terms of even what we think of. So for example, in some languages, they have scores of words for, like for example, in cold climates, they have a lot more words for snow. And that helps them, they've expanded their awareness of what snow is. But in environments that we grew up in or that are warmer, maybe there's only a couple words for snow. Maybe there's snowflakes, snow flurries, you know, but that just is a boundary around how we could think about snow. And that's for everything. So just to be aware of our paradigms, our field of perception, and understand that we have these boundaries and there's things outside of it. And now just bring ourselves back into this moment with that awareness while we talk about the paradigm shifting that's going on in this work, Messiah. And I just want to do a brief introduction and then we'll open it up for dialogue. What really touches me about this work is the timing and its connection. It's speaking to what is happening to us right now in our world at a fundamental paradigm shifting level. Many people, theorists, scientists, sociologists, and explorers in multiple domains are saying we're going through a major evolutionary transition, a major shift in our civilization paradigm. And we're seeing works now coming out about this and various perspectives in various ways. One of them has been the Expanse, which is exploring it from a more external systemic level layer, and it's in its 4th season over at Amazon. But this work is brand new, and this work is going deeper inside the paradigm shifting process in consciousness itself. And it's tackling one of our big religious spiritual paradigms of the Messiah. And what is the Messiah? And how different people interpret that concept of Messiah. And it's also, I believe, portraying a very advanced form of a type of integral spirituality, where it is transcending, it's integrating and transcending the boundaries of the Judaic, Christian, Islamic construct of paradigm, of the Messiah. And it's integrating all 3 theological structures and breaking them down. But they're not deconstructing it in a way that is just for deconstruction's sake. We get the sense that there is a greater vision here. You could feel it. And what that greater vision is, at least this 1st season, we could kind of hold it as there's this concept that the Christ in some mystical schools, advanced mystical schools in Christianity and in Kabbalah, the Messiah is a form of consciousness. It is the one self we all share. We could call it the sonship. In some traditions, they call it the sonship, or the, so it's this collective being of who we are. And if you hold that frame watching the Messiah, it all fits perfectly. Everything that's happening fits perfectly into that paradigm. But that paradigm is totally disconcerting to the old paradigms of what the Messiah is. So everyone's looking for the external miracle, which we're shown, but which the rational structure has, has trouble handling, and we don't even know if it was real or not. So the whole questioning of, yes, the walking on water, we've all seen it, but can we believe it? And is it something to believe? But the real power, the real messianic power is coming through the consciousness itself. So the miracles are the transfer, the people who come in contact with him in an intimate way, they're woken up. In some way. And some of the waking up is an actual, not just waking up. In integral, we talk about the difference between waking up and growing up. Waking up, when we do meditation, we could do meditation for many years, and we could reach higher and higher states, temporary states, and become more conscious, but we're often still in the same structure of our consciousness. when we come back from the meditation or from that trip, we come back into our structure. And it helps us evolve our structure up, but it's not the same. So with that, we have to do shadow work and all that for us to evolve for a stage of development.
And Mark, can you talk about growing up, what you mean by that?
Sure. Growing up is what we call vertical development, from one stage of development to the next. Whereas waking up is expanding your field of consciousness, but the structure of your consciousness is still, it's how we perceive the world. We have different lines of development, and they evolve at different rates. And they shift from stage to stage over time, and they're more fixed than a state of consciousness. State training, which we're used to in spiritual practice, many, is developing the capacity to achieve higher and higher states. But if we're not developing other lines of development, like our emotional line of development, stuff like that, we're still getting stuck at all these levels because we haven't done the growing up in certain levels of our being. So just waking up doesn't get us there. We have to wake up and grow up.
Brilliant.
And there's a couple of moments in Messiah where we could say that the person who's waking up is also at a vertical shift point.
That would be a great example. Is that maybe Felix, or what example would you use there?
Well, we don't have the full trajectory of each
story arc,
characters yet, so
we
we
could
can't.
say
So
that
we could just,
the cop, the federal agent, who's sort of part of a rational structure of kind of mythic rational, but has to come out as gay to himself in a way, has to acknowledge his that he's in this relationship. So that could be a move towards more pluralistic shift as part of his own waking up. He's also growing up, I think.
Yeah, and also there's this moment where it's like he realizes, he makes a fundamental existential shift of really kind of embodying and really feeling that he needs to live truth. He needs not to hide. He needs to be who he really is. And that is a major kind of, that is a kind of a growing up vertical development awareness. You know, that's you're shifting from subject to object in a way, and that's an indication of the vertical development. Is you're stepping outside your previous paradigm. So before that moment, it was okay for him to be in a level of cognitive dissonance between his personal life and his professional life. But then there's that moment where you have to, where it's just that paradigm, that way of being is no longer functional, no longer feels right.
I love how you've articulated, he was one of my favorite characters on the show. And I'm so happy to hear why. So thank you for explaining that so well. Yeah. Fantastic.
And the prostitute goes through something very similar, you know, in a different way, but she, you know, and the beauty here is that you get to see it. And these performances are so beautiful to me that you get to see their waking up.
Yeah, with the prostitute, you kind of see her waking up more than growing up because we don't see her arc. But you do see
Right.
it also with the Israeli special forces dude, who's kind of a mythic, rational character. You know, is very macho and violent, and has to shift. You know, he's
Yeah.
having trouble with his relationships, even with his kid. You know.
Yeah. So in a way, I mean, almost everyone he touches, he's waking up them pretty quickly, but there's also a trigger for growing up. It's really kind of beautiful what they're doing here. So basically for me, that is kind of the power here. And that's the calling of this moment, is for all of us, the second coming in this expanded Messiah paradigm is that we all get it. We all wake up to a Messiah consciousness. Messiah consciousness is awareness of our collective self, our one self that we share. And so the second coming is we all get it.
Incredible.
And that is
So
kind of what they're doing here. So yeah, so let's open it up, because we are opening it up.
okay, so I have to ask this. So, and since I'm co-hosting, I got to go first. The writer, the creator, like, who is this guy, Michael? I mean, that's something Sasha and I were talking about. This isn't just any person walking the streets, you know, this is somebody. So I, of course, went online and looked at his background and what he's created, but I just want to, you know, give a just tremendous kudos to him and his work for bringing this into reality for us to enjoy. Okay, now everyone else can go.
Before we go, one more thing. Just brought this up for me. One of the great things about this show, for me, from an integral perspective, is that it's not only showing the paradigm shift at the consciousness level of the individual, it's doing it in all four quadrants, as we talk about. So, which is the individual subjective paradigms, relationship paradigms are shifting as well. They're showing the shifts in the relationships because of these other shifts. They're showing how it changes people's behavior and actions, which is the objective quadrant. You know, it's also cultural and societal at scale. And we're ping-ponging between those four dimensions of paradigm shifting, and seeing how the paradigms shifting is kind of tetra and meshing. So it's ping-ponging across the quadrants. So when an individual interior is shifted, that affects their relationships, that affects their behavior, right? And then as big shifts in the and then you know, the collective relationship one affects the system. And then when you affect individuals who are higher up in the system, like the President of the United States, or, you know, then you get major, you know, so it's like you're seeing how what integral theory talks about as petra-evolution, how these four main dimensions of reality co-evolve. So we're getting a very visceral example of this co-evolutionary process, this co-awakening across domains, individual, relational, behavioral, and collective. Okay, sorry. Now I'm
Brilliant, Mark. Okay, who out there has comments, things to say? Eager to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions on the show. I knew Sasha was going to raise his hand.
Let me see if I can unmute this. So help me understand this, Mark. When you speak about this shift in consciousness, I have trouble with this modern idea, because when we look at, it seems that the show as I see it is simply pinpointing, it's like a diagnosis of where we've come since the Enlightenment, basically with Descartes' statement, I think, therefore I am, as really this rationalistic point of view, which many of the characters exemplify, specifically, I would say the woman. I don't see it as a global, you're speaking of it in grand global terms. I don't see that at all. I just see it as a diagnosis of where we are. And ironically, the young people are more, of course, flexible to shifting, right? But can you talk a little bit about this? I hear this a lot about this shifting consciousness, and I don't know. I'm trying to understand where it's coming from, whether it's magical thinking. I don't know if you listen. There's a social critic named Chris Hedges who talks about societies in decline, shift towards magical thinking and hopeful thinking, as opposed to really understanding the time they live. So when you speak of big shifts in consciousness, can you expand on that and how you see this in this? Because I don't see it through this series. I see a form of enlightenment from someone, but not, or, however you would characterize the Messiah, but the people around are profoundly stuck in some sort of pain, right? And the cycles continue.
Well, don't forget, this is a TV series. This is a streaming series. So this is season 1. So there is a lot of the story streams are in process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But what they're doing is they're building towards something. So there is a build. So, for example, there's moments where you get that he's walking across the water in Washington, D.C. with a whole country watching.
Mm-hmm.
So here you have a society moment. That is a collective moment. And the paradigm shift, before a paradigm can shift, one has to be aware that you are in a paradigm. One has to be pushed to the edge of your paradigm. Okay? And that moment pushes a lot, and they did that in parallel with, in the Middle East, the other person who's waking up, let's say. The other Messiah, or whatever you want. The parallel there happening between them. So we have two basic civilizational fields coming up against their paradigm of the Messiah and their current reality, their current way of viewing it. And so the people
has that changed at all? Sorry to interrupt, but has that, I look at it from a historical perspective, how is now changed? I mean, the Romans were doing this from that time.
The idea here is that we won't see the actual full paradigm change until the end of the series. But they are solidly laying the groundwork, because everything they're doing is pushing everyone to the boundaries of their paradigm in multiple domains. And they're doing it in a big picture feeling. Like you're feeling as you go through it, like there's a big picture and you're getting another piece of it. You're getting closer to it. So that is laying the groundwork for a major paradigm shift. Now, where we are now is the same place in many ways in our own world right now. when we talk about the post-truth age, we haven't come through that yet. We're still in the middle of the post-truth age, which we are still in the middle of paradigm deconstruction. So we could say that this work is about paradigm deconstruction. But even the lead character keeps suggesting that there is a plan. He just doesn't know it because God knows it. Now, I know that the rational mind has trouble with that and perceive it as fantasy. And also at integral, we have to be aware of what we call the pre-trans fallacy. And I think that's what you're speaking to, in that we can tend to imagine a lower structure as being a higher structure when it isn't. So the oneness that a child feels in the beginning is not the same oneness that a bodhisattva experiences when they are enlightened. There's a lot of similarities, but one is unconscious, the other is conscious. And that's a big difference.
Brilliant.
And what we have here so far has not crossed that line. So far, it has just challenged each perspective. So if you're coming from the mythic paradigm of the Messiah, what he's doing is directly challenging what your doctrine has told you. If you're from the rational, you're still trying to figure out how he's manipulating it, because there's got to be a scientific, objective, verifiable thing going on here. But you're hunting for it. So it's like, that's where we're at. That's where, and then even the pluralistic, the kind of pluralistic, which is we're all one and stuff like that, has trouble with him as well, because he operates in an integral way, which at times he'll respond in a mythic response, right, or at times a rational response. So he's aware, he's operating in a way, in a field of consciousness where he is resonating with the field of consciousness with the people that he's speaking to. And that's an indication of the integral structure. Because of that, we can infer that the trajectory of the show is going to fulfill this arc that they've already established in this very unique way. But you are correct that right now, there is no new paradigm for us to hold on to. We're entering the chrysalis phase. The caterpillar paradigms are turning to liquid. That's where we are.
Oh, beautiful.
I would say also we have this. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I'd love to hear from David, because we haven't had David on our show, and I was fortunate enough to talk to David a little bit about how we both really enjoyed this series. So, David, whenever you're ready to jump in, arm wrestle with us.
Yeah, I'd be happy to say a few things. I'm just as curious about what everybody else is thinking as well. I watched it twice. And the first time I watched it, I had no idea who had done it. Right? No idea who had created it. I just saw the thing and I said, wow, there's that classic question. That if Jesus or a Messiah-like character would come back within our existing culture, would we do any better than when we look back at the Roman times, particularly with the Jesus story? And and we have judgments about, well, how come they couldn't see him? You know, what did they miss and all the rest of it? So the question is, you know, does modern society do any? And that's always an interesting thing to sort of drop in the pool for me. So I watched it the first time, and you know, I sort of had this reaction to it, and I just said, yeah, it's interesting. He definitely is trying to solve for what this event of this person showing up, how it would play out within our current culture, how it would play out in the quarters of power, how it would play out with the military, how it would play out with people that are starving in the desert. I mean, basically, he had the full range. And the question that the second time as I came away from it, so I enjoyed it. I mean, let me put it that way. I just thought it was an interesting step forward. And like Mark said, because it's a series, it'll be interesting to see if there is a second season, and I guess that's still in question, where they take the story from here, right? Because they've set up a whole bunch of stuff that could go in a variety of different directions. But the basic theme on second watching that I tracked as a storyteller is the notion of his divinity, right? So throughout the story, we see things happen. We see him seemingly disappear out of a jail cell, and then we learn later that actually the guy just let him out. We see him show up in Texas, which is just strange because he was just in Syria. And then we find out that, or at least in terms of the storytelling, that there was a plane, you know, basically rented by somebody. Somebody flew him to just below this small town. We see the boy, him heal the boy and pull the bullet out of him. We see any number of, in quotes, miracles. And yet, about half the time, it seemed like he was playing with the idea of, in the evolution of an intelligence, and this goes back to the difference between Roman times and now, what we see as magic now versus what they saw as magic, just because we've expanded our perspectives and science and all that. How would that actually, you know, play out? So to a certain extent on the second watching, I found it a bit inconsistent that way. And I'm just curious about, you know, if I was talking to him or where he's going to take the series, because even the walk on water, right? I mean, even that, and you're right, Mark, everybody was watching it, but we are in an age of being able to fake all kinds of footage now. You can't trust any video, any photograph at all, because it can all be altered. And so to a certain extent, when he walked on water and suddenly the world didn't change for many people, it was just like, oh yeah, well, he walked on water. In a certain sense, that is our attitude. We're not sure whether we can believe our eyes anymore when someone shows us something. And we know from special effects and movies and all the rest of it, you can do anything that you like and want. So I saw any number of them. And in the end, I'll just jump to the end. The plane crash is an interesting one, because up until that point, there was either a rational explanation, the guy let him out of the cell, or he got on a plane, or even with the healing of the boy, that there may have been some sort of energetic process at which the bullet was extracted. I mean, we've expanded our notion of what healing is about to even include that at this point. We see it happen, miracles in quotes. But the plane crash was something that was just absolutely apocalyptic. We didn't see the plane come down and skid through the field, and they may have been hurt in it, but the plane, basically, when we see it, has disintegrated. And we see the dead bodies, we see him, in a sense, performing miracles, bringing people back, you know, from the dead. So this question of divinity was an interesting one, and particularly as you play it against the notion that we've expanded our intelligence to include so many more things than they would have in a traditional period around when Jesus and the Romans were doing, the Jews were doing this. That part, I just walked away with a lot of questions. about it, about where are you taking this character? Because it seems like part of the time you are definitely sort of playing this out and saying there are rational explanations for things that seem to be miracles or magic. And yet at the end, you now have basically disintegrated the plane, which nobody could survive. And yet he did without a scratch. And he's bringing people back from the dead. So in a certain way, you're back to oh, he does have miracle. He is a superhero. He has miracle powers, basically. And that part, if there's a second season, I'll be very interested to see where he takes that, because to me, it sort of left me feeling, although I really enjoyed all of it, and I thought he solved for a lot of the different things about how the world would react to this person in these events now. But that one, I suddenly went, oh, we dropped back into sort of more miracle-making, traditional, he's bringing people back from the dead. And by the way, the daughter, when she gets up at the thing, when she goes out to speak, even though he has taught her, she delivers a very fundamentalist reading of what this is all about. You're either with us or you're going to be swept away in the flood to hell. I mean, that's absolutely fundamentalist traditional perspective about that. And that was interesting to me, that she didn't show much movement given the amount of time that she had with him and, and experiencing him. So anyway, I'll just stop there. There's a lot of other things to say about it, but the question of his divinity and how that plays out in modern times, and because we're so enamored with superheroes right now, because we all, to a certain extent, feel helpless about what's going on in the world, and we just want people to be able to solve this for us. It was an interesting play along those lines for me.
I love that. It was interesting, if I can take a moment. Thank you, David. So Mark, when you talked about the Judeo-Christian Muslim, that sort of the fundamental and that sort of triumvirate, and how each of the places that he's gone have represented, the Christian fundamentalist in Texas, this young girl, the, Jibril, the Palestinian, Muslim Palestinian, and then this Aviram, his, representing Judaism. And I was thinking, I was like, I didn't put Aviram in that as representing that initially, but then Sasha and I were talking about the symbolism at the end where, simultaneously, Rebecca awakens at the hospital. She's had a near-death experience. And then Jibril awakens after the bombing at the mosque, after having maybe he did die, we don't know, but he definitely woke up. He touches the hand of Q, and, indicating that maybe he's giving him life. And then Abraham obviously has had, he was the one who we know was dead and resurrected. So it could be very interesting in season 2, these characters and their arcs. Will we see? I love the character Al-Masai, but my fear is we may lose him and we may go on to these other people. Anyway, would love someone else to jump in and comment.
Well,
yes, John.
For me, the show was, I liked it a lot, watched it a couple times, and it was all about, different viewpoints of the same thing. And I would say at the end, the Lazarus moment was witnessed only by the kid who tells the tall tale. So whether or not he was dead or not is debatable. And, Sully landed a plane on the water. So, people survive plane crashes all the time. So it's definitely possible. But the show actually kind of reminded me a lot of Breaking Bad, in that, you, on the one hand, if you're, looking at things from Walt's perspective, you're like, oh, I can see him doing what he's doing. And then, you look at it from Hank's perspective and you think, God, Walt's a terrible human being. So I'll be interested to see the story arc of El Masai and particularly Avi. You know, that's because to me he was pretty resolute in his beliefs all the way through. Taking him back and wanting him, he refused all of the grace, for lack of a better word, that the charlatan in his mind was offering. But I just kind of thought it would shift, the perspectives would shift, and that's how you would get different readings on like the walking on water. You don't really ever see it. You just kind of see over people's shoulder, or maybe something on Instagram or whatever, those little feeds. But I was really the guy the Felix character, I thought was he was somebody that close. I guess his ego just got the best of him. But I'll be interested to see what happens with him, because he to me, like, made the wrong choice kind of at the end there, even though it was in service, I guess, of everything. So but again, I thought different kind of viewpoints of the same events, and how we interpret it and how that's filtered through the mediums we get and the people that we listen to. That's my take.
Excellent. Thank you, John.
Yeah, so I had a couple things I was going to say. Just in response to something Sasha had said earlier about Chris Hedges and some of the ideas. I love Chris Hedges. I think he's a brilliant guy, but I do think, like a lot of people in the media and a lot of the people running everything, he doesn't really know about stage structures, about these evolutionary stage structures that we're going through that are now more and more well researched. Some of the meta theories like integral theory and the others. So
I think he's a student of divinity from like Harvard or Yale. So
right, but that's a different thing than the stage structures, mythic, rational, pluralistic, integral, and the idea that our society is actually advancing, and we could regress or we can go forward, but there is a trajectory. So when you kind of hold that, then you kind of see that a lot of these pathologies, when people revert to magical thinking, that's a pathology of a particular stage, as is trying to transcend that stage to the next stage. And what I loved about the show Messiah is that it's showing 5 different structures of consciousness in the first episode. You have the magic stage, which is the people who are convinced that he's a Messiah because he made this sandstorm appear. And so they're magical thinkers. They follow him because they think he's the Messiah and he saved them. But also he communicates to them very kind of in a mythic structure. Like when the guy says, "We don't want any women sitting here, haha." He kicks the guy like a dog. He says, "Get out of here and put a woman in your place," which is, you couldn't say, "Oh no, it's important that we treat all people equally." You can't communicate that way to someone at that magic mythic structure. And then of course all of them they want to fight, and he says, "All right, collect all the guns and bury them," which is so he responds to them in a certain way, but as soon as he gets to the army, then he's dealing with them in a rational way. So he's sort of appropriate to whichever structure he's dealing with, which is why I think it's different also than someone like Breaking Bad, which is a much more pluralistic show. You kind of have all these different viewpoints ping-ponging around, but there's no overarching view. Maybe at the end there is, but whereas in Messiah, I really felt like there's an overarching view of where everyone's pathology is. So you also see the mythic pathology in the preacher, who's a very interesting character, but as soon as El Masri comes, he has the best intentions, and then he kind of starts to see opportunity because his father-in-law is a big, televangelist. So, there's some opportunity here, And I also noticed when Marcus talked about synchronization of the senses, which is that as a filmmaker, when you're making a show like this, you want to also try to use the filmmaking style and techniques and sound and all of that. And so much of the way it's written, the way everyone dreams about Al Masri, but the way they dream about him is appropriate to their structure. So for the boy, he just appears. For the the Israeli Secret Service guy, he suddenly dreams that he's being interrogated and he's shackled, and then he wakes up and it's like this has gone on. So each of them, the president, who's the Mormon, and I actually have a theory that Mitt Romney watched this show before he went and testified, and before he voted for the impeachment. He actually,
I like that theory, Jonathan. That's awesome.
Because this was a Mormon president who is called to do the right thing. But the president, when he dreams about al-Masri, there's a flood, which is a very biblical kind of mythic vision that he has. So there's a lot of consistency woven through the style of the show and how it's communicated through each of these structures. The rational character, the CIA agent, who's very rational, kind of mythic rational, because she's regressed maybe a little bit after her husband got killed. It's a very sophisticated show in that way, and the way the structures are represented. And you had talked about the people who made this show. I know Mark Burnett from Survivor, who also does a lot of Christian filmmaking, and Roma Downey, who was with Touched by an Angel. But there are also people involved with this who've worked with the Wachowskis on Sense8. So the director, James McTeague, who directed most of the episodes, also directed V for Vendetta, and he directed a lot of Sense8. So he's definitely studied integral theory. And Johnny Klimek, who did the music, worked on Sense8 and worked on other shows with the Wachowskis, and they actually study integral theory. So I think there's no question that this was designed with that evolutionary structure, through the structures in mind.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I saw that the writer-creator had done some horror, had done, thriller, had done, Catholic story from Australia originally. So it should be interesting. I would say it's absolutely critical that he stay involved in these next seasons, because that's my only concern, is that it gets off course if it's not, oftentimes there's one season as a group of people and then they change that creative team for the next, for whatever reason. Does anyone know if season 2 is underway?
They haven't announced it yet.
Well,
and that's the other question I have for everybody is what did you think of the reviews? Because in a certain sense, when I have a reaction, and I did like it, sometimes then I kind of go, all right, well, let's go see how the audience felt about it, right? So the audience numbers were, pretty high, very high, right? But the reviewers, and when I went and looked at who the reviewers were, because I was thinking, all right, maybe some of the fringe reviewers are pulling those numbers down, and that they were actually the 3 or the 4 major publications that, Hollywood, Variety, all of that. I mean, they were major reviewers that didn't care for it much. And they usually started most of their reviews by saying they would go right to Mark and his wife, because they had watched the other more traditional, very well done, but very traditional Jesus stories, and sort of felt, whatever they felt about it. But anybody have any thoughts on reading the reviews and why there was that reaction, particularly from the major reviewers?
Absolutely. What we're seeing is that we have a major influx of integral filmmaking happening the last 10 years, but film theory has not evolved past pluralistic film theories. A lot of film reviewers are operating out of pluralistic film theory. They're judging it with that criteria. That is the essential history criticism field right now. There's a few obscure works, but it's basically they can't see integral works for the most part. Most of the integral films have been very highly successful with the audience, and people are picking it up. But the film critics are not seeing what a lot of other people are seeing, because they are caught in that paradigm. of that form of film criticism.
And it's so interesting too. I was having a conversation with one of the members in the network recently, and she has a friend who had optioned a book and was writing a screenplay based on the book. And it was a very spiritual book, but her friend was taking all the spirituality out of the script because she was told that it's not going to sell, that's, you know, going to put her script to the side. So, you know, I think it's just, it's too edgy. It's too risky for a lot of people to, like you were saying, Mark, they're not at that stage, but they're also just so in the mainstream. You know, I thought, wow, you know, I was surprised that Mark and Roma were involved, because it really does, you know, question the Christian faith and beliefs and all of this. And I thought, wow, I'd love some of my Mormon relatives to watch the show and hear what they have, their reaction to it. But I find it really exciting, because I think the audience at the end of the day is the one who determines what gets made. So if enough of us are loving the film and getting our friends to watch it, then, you know, who cares what the reviewers are saying? I never really read reviews anyway, because I feel like it taints my own view of the material. I like to be just totally a blank mental slate when I watch something. So
here's a good point, though,
my
too.
input.
Yeah, that's a really good point here, and that is that, you know, we are, as far as I can tell, we're seeing this deconstruction of paradigms everywhere, and that includes film criticism. So it's like, so the old paradigms are no longer functional. They're no longer operating. And it's in every domain, even film, you know. So you've got, the boundaries are being shaken. So you've got film critics who are not able to see what's going on. You've got news reporters reporting on just one level that isn't the whole story, and they can't really see what's going. It's just, so there is this happening. Also, I want to comment on a couple things that people have said real quick before we go. Just the ending, when you look at it really closely, as I think someone pointed out, that we don't actually see the Lazarus moment. I think John pointed that out. And it's the kid who says, he basically, he rose you guys from the dead, but he's a kid. So we don't know what he saw, what he didn't see, and what he projected onto it. So, it's a higher, I'm there with you, David, in terms of the stakes got higher. It was a lot harder to rationalize, to think of the rational explanation for that. And I think as the story goes along, hopefully, as it continues, they'll be pushing that boundary more and more. Now, we don't know, and the other thing is we don't know where it's going to go. So yes, it could end up collapsing into a traditional paradigm. And there's many variables that could affect that, from Trina's suggestion, and it does happen, that the showrunner's replaced, or somebody's replaced that's doing all this, or that the executives, like, either are coming in because it's a hit and they want to make it better, or it's not and they have an idea of how to improve it. So there's all these variables, or the creator is not fully there yet themselves. They can only go so far. So we don't know. We honestly don't know. But right now, the foundation is there for a solid, transformational, integral story. And there's enough of an arc for me to kind of say that there's an integral structure operating here, but we don't know how advanced it is until it's over. Right. And so we get films like Groundhog Day, which the story is very integral, but there's a lot of elements that are pluralistic about it. And it's, you know, it's kind of very simple in that it's just a single cinematic structure going through it that is making it integral as he evolves because of the suckness of time. Or you get more advanced integral works that are incorporating it into the cinematic structure to a point where there's synchronization of the senses and all this stuff, which basically for everybody, that is when the story, themes, and ideas are synchronized with the images, the sounds, and the temporal patterns, which is movement through time, rhythms, and all that. And when all of that is synchronized for the same purpose, it induces a lived, embodied experience. So, yes,
Yes, I have a question in regards to like the bigger picture. When you speak about, someone brought up, film reviewers and critics, there's a language around the dominant culture. You know, films are critics. That tells me everything I need to know about what they do. They're a critic. People have turned into consumers. This is very bizarre to me. I am somehow designated white. Very bizarre. I'm not white. I'm far from white. Someone else is black. You look at them, they're far from black. Are these also the language used by the dominant culture? Like, as things change, do they change from very small movements? Because you look at politics, you look at, at a big level, you look at the media, they're all propounding the same either mythic or dualistic structures in their language, even in their faces. Can you speak about this a little bit?
Sure. I believe what we're seeing, according to our research anyways, and the research of others, it looks like what's going on here is that the transition we're in is potentially the shift from out of that us them. From basically the shift is essentially from a nation-centric to a world-centric worldview. Now, it's very kind of complex because our technologies are pushing into super integral and even transpersonal at the leading edge. And our politics are at war between mythic, rational, and pluralistic. And our civilizational structures are still at the rational industrial. So for example, when we go into a social services facility in the United States, it's a factory, it's an industrial thing. So it's like, they'll ask you questions. Do you fit into A, B, C, or D? Are you white? This. That is a rational industrial structure. That's a field. That our societies are still anchored in that at a structural level. But because our technologies are global centric and beyond, a lot of our fields are being pushed there. And because of some of our power structures are still anchored in the mythic, we have a major kind of flux here. But the central thing, and what Wilbur talks about, is when we reach these kind of points, there's a lot of fear that comes up because we're entering the unknown, because our paradigms are collapsing. And there's a point where we have to go to where our paradigms have collapsed and we don't have the new paradigm yet, which is terrifying. It's the chrysalis phase between the caterpillar and the butterfly. And that is terrifying. And we often, mostly unconsciously, will revert back to the most stable structure. And evolutionary wise, the most stable structure right now is mythic, us, them, black and white, seeking authority figures to help us and save us. Because the mythic structure had over 1,000 years of development and maturity. And the rational structure is only a few hundred years old. And the pluralistic structure, or the information age, is less than that. So, so all of that is making us, so we've got this recoiling back into the mythic and into us, them, but also it's beautiful because that recoiling is what we need, because we have to deal with our shadow elements and those parts of our collective field that haven't evolved far enough yet. So we have to deal with our shadow. So we could look at Trump and Brexit and all that as our shadow coming up for us to deal with. This us-them patterning is coming up for us to deal with, because we can't cross over the bridge to world-centric with the same kind of structure of us versus them. We have to come up to a we. And I don't believe humanity has ever been called to make that huge of a leap. The systems theorist Gordon Hall talks about this, that the huge leap that we have here because of the gap between our technologies and what they're creating and the side effects, because everything does have it, we can't solve because we're not there yet. So the gap between our collective consciousness and where our technologies are and where that's taking the world is huge. We've never had that before.
Wow.
And the leap that it takes to get across it, this letting go of the us-them polarization field, major. And so if you look at Messiah from that perspective, it plugs in perfectly into that. At this point, it's speaking directly to that at this point, either consciously or unconsciously. Now that's the thing too. A lot of this could be unconscious. The people making it could have no idea, about any of that. If they're operating at a certain level, it just automatically happens.
We're at the hour mark, and so I want to, for our repeat video viewers, just say thank you to all of you, but then also, once we hit stop record, invite all of you who would like to continue talking about the series or anything else that was discussed. Mark, will you be able to stay on for a little longer?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Mark and Jonathan and everyone who joined us today. And yeah, let's tell our friends to go out and see the show so that we can help persuade season 2 to be created. Okay, thanks so much.